Draft primer, as usual. This time we're going to be talking through burn and all of the intricacies of how you can end up in burn, what you're going to do with burn, and how exactly this vintage rotisserie draft accommodates a burn player. Because it's not the normal draft strategy that you see coming when you hear about vintage rotisserie draft. You hear about broken things like Reanimator, you hear about Oath of Druids, you hear about Storm. There's all sorts of crazy decks that appear, but vintage does have space for something like burn to occur. We've heard Stephen Hagen talking last time about how vintage to him is more of a commander format than it is a vintage rotisserie. Sorry, vintage rotisserie draft is more of a commander format to him than it is a vintage format. So it's pretty cool to think of that in that world. How would a 1v1 commander deck accommodate burn? And then when you think about it a little bit, they had to literally ban the commander for the French EDH that handled that allowed those things to happen. So in this format, what would that look like? How can we use the fundamentals of what burn is to give a strategy that will allow for shutting down opponents quickly, disallowing them from getting access, these kind of things. Overall, burn is it's a strategy that employs throwing lightning bolts, throwing other things that deal damage directly at your opponent's face, and attempting not to deal with the fact that they could be doing all sorts of things to you, right? You're trying to kill them before they combo off or before they gain control of the board. You get to leverage cards that literally will just kill your opponent, while everyone else is trying to set up fragile two-card combos. Similarly, cards like Lightning Bolt that seem at their face like, hey, this card is going to help us destroy our opponent. Lightning Bolt also will let you interrupt combos. So, for instance, Painter Grindstone, one of the classic combos for Vintage Rotisserie Draft, is really straight up dead to a well-timed Lightning Bolt, where you can just stop their combo from going off. It works out really well. So it's cool that you get to kind of get into this game where you can interrupt combos, you get to kill your opponent on a fast clock, and you have a proactive game plan that doesn't have a lot of overlap with other players. So one of the reasons that I end up in Burn, for instance, is that I end up being the 5 through 7 seed, which are not optimal seeds by any means, but you can end up in a spot where you get a Mox early, and then you don't really know where to go from there. You don't have the wheels, so you can't get really sweet combos right on the sides. You can't get on 1 or 8. You also don't have the advantage of being able to you don't have the advantage of being in the middle and being completely reactive, but if you're like on the middle, on the side tiers, you have to deal with all the disadvantages of all the different choices. Hey Team Neem, welcome. Yeah, we're talking through burn, talking through the possibility of how you get there, and what kind of things can happen to force you into burn, and why you might want to play it. So being able to interrupt is a big part of it. Being able to being able to just have a fast clock that your opponent needs to be able to interrupt and needs to be able to kill you before you can get it through, and having replaceability. So one of the cool things is all of your cards do fundamentally the same thing. So let's start by just listing off lightning bolt alternatives. So that's going to be lightning bolt. Let's get these lightning bolt, rift bolt, and in fact, let's just jump over to take a look at MTG Top 8, take a look at the Burn Legacy list. This is a good place to start for this kind of format. Uh, Burn is a deck that sees a lot of play in both Legacy and Modern. So starting with a spot where you have access to starting with a spot where you already have access to good deck lists to base these off of. Let's just start grabbing some of those replaceable effects. So we have Chain Lightning here that we don't have on a list. We have yeah, let's just start kind of literally grabbing these one for one. So Chain Lightning, Lava Spike, Searing Blaze, Searing Blood, Skewer the Critics. Okay, these are some good ones to switch over to. So we got Lava Spike, Skewer the Critics, which is a new one. This is one that I know Team Nee would definitely be playing in her deck if she were out here. Did very well. Took second place in a GPT, I believe, piloting a mono red burn deck in Modern, back when Modern was just starting out to be a thing. So we have Chain Lightning. Chain Lightning is probably the best alternative to Lightning Bolt if you just had to pick one. But, I mean, all of these cards are beautiful because they do very similar things. So we're going to have 1 mana bolts. Then we have 2 mana bolts. And we're not going to even have anywhere close to all of these, but lightning strike. Let's see. Price of progress. We'll throw in here. That one's arguable because I mean it hits non-basic lands. Let's pull up a price of progress a minute. So price of progress hits them for the non-basic lands they control, which is not exactly the same thing, but it does do a fair amount. Flame Rift, which hits both players for 4, but in this kind of deck, you're not going to be all that concerned with your own life total. Let's see. Risk Factor does a similar idea. That one's going to be falling into the 3 mana spells, though. And building burn this way is actually kind of a cute idea because you get to the point where you're fundamentally building a curve deck. You want almost all of your spells to be at the 1 mana slot, and you don't necessarily need all of them to be to be in the high end. You don't need a natural curve. You can just have everything sitting there low. We're gonna put Thunderous Wrath here. This is one that is not likely to make the spot to make it in the cut, but it's a 1 mana spell that has the potential to deal a lot of damage. So Thunderous Wrath. In the same vein as Vexing Devil. Both of these cards can kind of do a lot of damage, but also don't have the guaranteed. So Browbeat is another one that is in kind of the this might be playable. I can't imagine it really would be, but Risk Factor is effectively an updated Browbeat. So let's see, what else are they playing in these legacy lists? Sulfuric Vortex, and so I'm going to put this one down here because Sulfuric Vortex is a linchpin of the deck, but it's not a 3 mana spell that deals damage immediately, so it doesn't really fall into that. It doesn't fall into the same speed of killing your opponent dead the turn you draw it. It's definitely a much different kind of style of card. One relatively new one, though, that has been making massive waves is Exquisite Firecraft. This card has been doing a lot of damage, especially in a format where you have a ton of counterspells running around. Being able to deal 4 to your opponent guaranteed and have it be uncounterable is very, very powerful. So let's see, what else do we got from this? Okay, so we're going to get into the draw spells territory. So then we have draw spells. So in this case, we're going to have, what is that card called now? It looks like, there's a new one that just got printed. Light Up the Stage, that's the guy. So Light Up the Stage, effectively in this deck, says draw 2 spells for 1 mana. So these are not going to be obviously a bolt, but it is kind of a refill type card. So draw or refill. And once again, we're just kind of like building up through what types of cards we may want in this deck, and then we're going to talk through when to take these, when to end up in burn, things like that. Because it's certainly not a deck that if you're in the first seed, the chances of ending up in burn are very low, because you probably have you have the wheel, and you have the advantage of a Black Lotus to start with, both of which aren't bad for burn, but they do tend to push you in other directions. So Pyrostatic Pillar and Goblin and Eidolon of the Great Revel are going to be our creatures, so let's get those under their own column. Eidolon of the Great Revel. This card does a ton, and acts as an anti-storm card. It's great. So we're going to have finishers, and we're going to have utility cards. So something like the non-creature version of Eidolon of the Great Revel would definitely fall into this category. Pyrostatic Pillar is the name of it. Alright. Searing Blaze, Searing Blood are both very good against creatures, so we're going to put those here. And Searing Blood. Let's get one of those up there. These are cards that can be very powerful. In the right matchups, they will kill your creature and deal your opponent 3 damage, which is wonderful. But it's not necessarily the card that you can play in every matchup. If you have to look at your field where you're going against, whether this is going to be a playable card or not. A lot of times it won't be, sadly. So then under creatures, we're going to have things like Monastery Mentor. Taylor Swift Spears, it's called. We're going to have Goblin Guide. Um, you could argue for Young Pyromancer in this list. It's a very powerful card. And along with that one, there's a new version of Young Pyromancer that I do not remember the name of, but let's look that one up a minute. This is from the new set. And it's a 3-mana Young Pyromancer. It actually is, in the lore, I believe it's a grown-up version of Young Pyromancer. Let's see. This is from, it's from Modern Horizons. Let's see if we can find it. Seasoned Pyromancer, there we go. Lightly seasoned, just like the meal tonight. Tonight for my meal, I'm enjoying a small batch bourbon and making it old fashioned. It's delicious. So Seasoned Pyromancer has the advantage of being a draw spell, making more tokens going wide, as well as being just a creature by itself. So it kind of hits all of those sweet spots. And it can really end up, in this deck where you're running Burn, you also have a ton of cards sitting in your graveyard. So you end up with a really interesting spot. So let's jump back over to the Legacy list and see if there's any of these that are running the, there's a, how do we see this? Yeah, okay. So you can see in this Legacy list, there's Bedlam Reveler as a card that you wouldn't think of necessarily as a burn card, but it certainly can fall very well into these kind of decks because it allows you to get new cards and be a beater. It just kind of hits all of those threats that you need to. And we're gonna drop Beaumont Courier there as well. So let's see, Beaumont Courier and the Bedlam Reveler. Both fall very handily into this. And once again, you have to be careful because your burn deck really does want to be a beat down with spells deck, not a beat down with creatures deck. Otherwise, you just end up getting blocked very easily. But I mean, it's nice to have the option of these creatures, even if you're not running them in the main deck. So let's see, any there? Goblin. Oh, Goblin Lava. What is this? Not Goblin. Grim Lavamancer is a huge one that just will always make the cut, regardless of how creature centric your deck is. But because it can go directly at their face in a burn deck, you're going to have an abundance of cards going into your graveyard. So it's pretty easy to make this one turn into a useful spell. Fire Blast, of course, it falls into finishers. Fire Blast is a card that I think if they put it into Modern would just massively shake it up. It'd be a really cool spot, but it would also make Burn probably way too good. Just being able to hit with 4 damage out of nowhere, especially in Modern where you could have multiple of these run, it would be a really interesting world, but probably not one I want to live in. So, Smash to Smithereens falls into this dealing damage while also taking out things. Smash to Smithereens, and especially in a format like this where you just have everybody running, like everybody is running some number of artifacts, it's almost never going to be a dead card. Let's get Smash to Smithereens up here. It's just so powerful. Okay, so then let's jump back over to that Legacy list one more time, and we're going to see if we can see any of the cards that are there that look like they would be worthwhile in out of the sideboard, because there's going to be a lot of these cards, like Abrade, for instance, is a very clear one. It doesn't damage the opponent, so it's probably not one that you'd want to like slot specifically for burn, and I can imagine a lot of other decks jumping into Abrade very easily. But it's definitely one to think about and not lose sight that it might exist. Similar Forked Bolt if you need to take out a lot of 1 toughness creatures, but it's not kind of at the core of the deck. If there's a lot of life gain going around, like once you fall into burn, you'll often have players counter picking against you to make sure that they have life gain, like Thragtusk and things like that. Rampaging Ferocidon could make the cut, but it's not one that I would be looking for initially. It's not a great card, you know. But yeah, so I think we hit most of them. Volcanic Fallout is one that could certainly make the cut, but isn't a go-to. Destructive Revelry as well. This is our first non-red card, but we'll put it in here. It's effectively a Smash to Smithereens that can also hit enchantments, but it requires green mana. So let's get that pulled up on the monitor here. really good card. Just once again, it only deals 2 damage, but it breaks up combos. And that's the really cool thing about burn is that you get the possibility of breaking up combos along with just a solid deck that can beat down and kill people. So let's see. All right, now we have kind of our framework built out here. Let's see how many cards we have. We got 7, 10, 13, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30 cards. So as of right now, we're at 30 cards of our picks, and we probably won't need all of these cards. You can guess that some of them are not going to be super important, but 30 cards is a good number to base this off of. Let's go back and look at some of these other lists that have happened. So we don't have any players in the St. Louis draft that have done burn yet. That might happen for the next one. I don't know. We'll see if I'm playing or not. But it's definitely on my list that if I end up kind of in this sixth or seventh seed again, it's very easy to fall into burn, especially if you're like basically anywhere in here. If you kind of don't have a great plan that pops up, I could easily see falling into burn. But back in VRD5, or was it VRD? Let's see. It was one of these middle ones. VRD4. Josh Ventura actually fell directly into burn, so it was really cool. In this format, Mana Crypt went really early. Time Vault and Time Walk went before the Moxen, so it actually ended up, and Force of Will and Tinker went before a Mox. So Josh ended up in a great position where he got 2 Moxen initially, which gives him a great spot to do lots of things, but he chose to take it in a burn direction. He sent a message by taking Lightning Bolt third pick. This is probably a card that you definitely don't need third pick. I don't know for sure, but let's take a look at the ones here. See when Lightning Bolt went. Lightning Bolt went 39th pick here. That was probably too late. Somebody forgot about it. But here, I know that people were thinking about it the entire time, and here it went 32nd pick. So it's still like, we're not talking first through 10th round. We're talking it's going to be somewhere in the second half of the draft after people know where their lanes are. So Lightning Bolt going at that early is probably way too early. But the thing I really do like that I think we should talk about is these choices here. Being able to force a run on fetch lands early is one of the key powers of running a deck that has a game plan that not a lot of people want to interact with. So if we see this burn deck we're building right now, of these cards, which of these might actually want somebody else to interact with them, or might want somebody else to be picking them? I could see no, Lightning Strike's definitely not going to be in there. Cards like Lightning Bolt might, Chain Lightning maybe, definitely none of these. Probably not these. Maybe Light at the Stage. Let's see. Eidolon the Great Revel if somebody's in Storm, people might want that. Goblin Guide probably not. Young Pyromancer maybe. But like with all of these cards we've just listed off, there are 3, 4, 5 cards that could actually be reasonably taken. The rest of these we can drop down into the bottom half of the draft. So yeah, we have 30 picks laid out, but we probably have in our first 10 picks 0 so far. So let's start putting out stretch goals, right? These are kind of the cards that these are like the top 10 kind of top 10 cards that we hope to get in the first 10 rounds. Because as you can see here, none of these cards that are out that exist right now are in the first 10 rounds. So let's get the stretch goals built up. So Mox Ruby for sure, and then either I think Mox White, so Pearl, or Mox Pearl or Mox Emerald. Both of these allow us to get some play to us where utility cards that we didn't talk about. So let's put Hate in here. So for Hate, we can do things like there's a lot of places you can go in Color Splash. So Destructive Revelry is a big one. Atarka's Command. There's Lightning Helix. Let's see. Actually, let's jump over to the MTG Top 8 and take a look at some of the... We're going to take a look at some of the modern decks. Because, yeah, we've seen all the legacy decks that exist here, and those are good. But the modern decks might actually have a little more play to them because the legacy lists are so guaranteed to be where they are that the modern lists actually have some play and get to try to splash around in different colors. To see... Let's see, where do they qualify burn now? I would have expected it to be up here under aggro. Let's see, so there's blue-red aggro, And this is literally what I do when I'm thinking of strategies. I just kind of like look around, see what decks exist in other formats, and then start pulling out. The Canadian Highlander would actually be a great place to look for what might be a burn deck in here. I genuinely don't know where they would qualify this though. So let's see, goblins, pyro prison, and pyro prison might actually be a good place to take a look as well. I'm just gonna pull up one of those lists so we can take a look at it. But I don't know, maybe they have burn under combo for some reason. Burn? Huh. Alright, so they do have a cool search feature here. So let's just go to modern and say what decks run Goblin Guide. And we would also want them to run Monastery Swift Spear. Because, I mean, I know that burn isn't the best in the current metagame, but there has to be a deck that runs these cards. Okay, yeah, they do call it burn. Maybe it's not very recent. Okay, the last one is from, no, the last one's very recent, so I don't know exactly what's going on here, but we'll pull up a few of these. Actually, let's pull up they have a nice compare list here as well that lets you just see a generic list of all the cards that might be playable in a burn deck. So Dreadhorde Arcanist doesn't see a lot of play, it looks like. There are very few of them that actually run this, but there have been a couple. Um, what you see here is down the left side is all the cards that have been played in any burn deck, and along the right are examples of decks. So you can see that this deck ran one of Dreadhorde Arcanist, whereas something like Eidolon of the Great Revel, the average is 3.8, meaning everybody runs 4. There's very few decks that don't run 4. Goblin Guide, literally everyone runs 4. But you can see we hit all the creatures that they have here. So then if we see the other cards that you could splash into, Bump of the Night, Deflecting Palm. Some of these are a little dodgy, but we may as well put them in. Deflecting Palm. Bump of the Night, I can't imagine a deck that's a red-black burn deck, but in fact, let's not even try. If you did end up in that, I feel like you're in a very different deck where you're running things like Kolaghan's Command, Mind Twist, and you're probably a black deck that is running red for control elements. So I don't imagine that actually being a deck that would pop up. But Boros Charm is very real. Boros Charm dealing 4 damage can be a game ender immediately. Molten Vortex I'm not familiar with as a card. Oh, this is the discard a land. Okay, so that's not one that we're going to have to concern ourselves with. Shard Valley, however, is a good pickup. That's one that is just straight up a bolt, and in this format you're going to have some extra cards lying around to throw away. So Shard Valley is definitely worth putting on that list. Secure the Critics. Skullcrack is a good 2-mana one. Let's see, anything else in here we want to make sure we don't forget on the list? Okay, yeah, I mean I think we hit all the basic burn cards that are seen play in the main deck here. You can also see a lot of the lands, and the lands are going to be where things get interesting, but particularly here, I care about this sideboard. So here, in the sideboard, we're not going to list like things like Choke, because Choke is very good, but it's just like a generically good green card, so that should be on your list of hate cards in green. What we're looking for here are cards that we wouldn't necessarily qualify as hate cards, but are definitely burn cards that deal your damage to your opponent, that other decks aren't necessarily looking for. So Cindervines, I think, is a great one. So let's get Cindervines pulled up here. Cindervines allows you to get long-term advantage where they take 1 damage every time they cast a spell, but also you can sacrifice it to stop them from comboing off. It's just a very powerful effect that allows for games to end really quickly against combo decks because they can't. I mean, if you're playing against Storm, it's very hard to combo off through a Cindervines. Let's see what else we got in here. Dragon's Claw is a card that we might want to be worried about other people taking against us, but it's not one that I think there's not usually 2 drafters, especially if you see the spot open for burn. There's not usually going to be 2 players playing burn. Molten Rain, if you want to go with the land destruction package, it certainly could make the cut. So that's actually a good thing to list here is land destruction, because there are decks that are burn and want to be running land destruction. In that kind of thing, we're going to be looking for a Wasteland, Strip Mine, of course, Molten Rain, and yeah, so let's pull up so you can see this list that I'm typing out here. Molten Rain would definitely make that area. And then you could even go deeper and put Stone Rain and things on there. But I think that this is kind of the baseline package. If you are in this world, Crucible of Worlds is a great one to have in your deck, because being able to recur those cards that you've been able to draft relatively early is going to be really important for you. So let's go back and pull up this modern list again. It's kind of cool just being able to dig through a lot of the older modern lists as well, because they're all just really different. Rakdos Charm can be really good if somebody happens to be on, if somebody's on Twin. Rakdos Charm just straight up ends the game. So it can be a really good card to splash into. Once you're in burn, you often will have a lot of fetch lands that you can pick up just a swamp very easily without disrupting your deck too much. So it's a card to be aware of at least. Satyr Fire Dancer is cute. It allows you to control the board while hitting their face. Not one that's very relevant in this format where there's not that many creatures running around. Cards like Shatterstorm are definitely worth being aware of, but not a card that is burn specific. It's just if you happen to be in red, something like Shatterstorm is very good. Um, about Wear and Tear, things like that, are cards that are specific to our colors. So Wear and Tear is one that you'll probably have to fight for a little bit. You can't just float that one forever. Similarly, Stony Silence and Rest in Peace are cards that are obviously fantastic. But no, I think we hit all the big ones. You can see here Core Firewalker and things like that are really good if people are trying to burn you out, but that's not a thing that pops up that often. You could definitely see, and we'll talk about this in a minute, is how to know when you need to take hate cards against yourself. So that'll be interesting. In fact, let's jump into that right now. So there's hate cards that are so devastatingly powerful against burn that you just need to pick them up yourself rather than let somebody else pick them up. So some of those cards, and I'll pull up each of these because they are all very different. They're not cards that you see running around really in any format. But Warmth, for instance, is a card that is just if somebody resolves it against you, it is unbeatable. I believe it's Chill is the other one that is the other hardcore color hoser from around the same area. And if this card resolves against you, it's really difficult for you to win. So these are cards that I would, if I were in burn, I would consider taking these in the first 20 picks to make sure nobody else gets them. But we still have a stretch goal sitting here. Nothing that we've called out has really even come into that area yet. I suppose it's possible that Crucible, Strip Mine, Wasteland all fall in that list. So I think that, yeah, we can move these two up into this area. That if you want to be able to do that land destruction package, you really do need to get those relatively early. And this one goes up here as well then. So we have Molten Rain many times because Molten Rain's that good. There's Stone Rain, of course, and there's numerous others down in this area. Okay, so now that we know kind of what the cards we're looking for in burn are, how do we actually decide from that point when do we fall into burn? And it's a hard decision. It's hard to know when this spot is going to be open because there are cards that are so insanely powerful against you, like Warmth, Chill. There are cards that just they gain so much life that it's very difficult to come back from. That it's hard to know when to actually slot into this. And I think that if it's also difficult because if you're in burn, you saw we have like 30 picks here. And our stretch goals are relatively small, so it's not like we can be splashing around in counter spells for a while and then audible into a burn strategy, kind of like how kind of very similar to what Dan did this last time, where you saw he was sitting in counter spells and then jumped into infect. You don't have that luxury in burn so much. You kind of have to make a statement initially. So Josh Ventura decided to do it by taking Lightning Bolt, third pick. I like to do it by instead taking all the fetch lands really early. I think that that's a great way to lock people out of these cards and force a run on cards. So not only are you getting the cards you need for your mana fixing and for activating things like Grim Lavamancer, playing potentially 2 to 3 splashes, but you also do get guarantees of making other people waste picks early, because if you take Scalding Tarn, somebody else is going to have to take Bloodstained Mire or things like that to make sure that they get the cards they need when they want them. The other thing I really like that Josh did in this list is he kind of started taking other hate pieces like Gorilla Shaman, and just took cards that you wouldn't necessarily think would be necessarily powerful, like Relic of Progenitus, Spirit of the Labyrinth, but he kind of started taking these hate bears type cards because they're also incredibly powerful in a burn list. I just noticed Flame Javelin is a great one that we didn't have called out here, but is a really powerful one. So worth having in our list as well. Let's see. Oh, Flame Javelin. Let's pull it up. Uh, it deals 6 damage to you if you draw it off a bob, so that's not ideal. But it does deal a lot of damage to your opponents as well. So dealing 4 for 3 mana is a pretty good deal. Only having a single card. Magus of the Moon and Blood Moon are big ones that we can call out here as well under this land destruction. They're not cards that other people are necessarily looking to get into, but if you do see people that are running around on lots of different colors of mana, they can be incredibly powerful. Ankh of Mishra as well. If you this card is a bit of an edge case, but Ankh of Mishra, if you are going hard into that land destruction package, like in this case, he was running he was running the what is that card even called? He was running Ajani. He was running the Ajani Vengeance, which Armageddons them. So if you are Armageddoning them, controlling their lands, being able to hit them for potentially 6 damage or something like that off of an Ankh of Mishra can be very helpful. So it's worth having on the list here. Plus, it's a relatively low cost. Only costing 2 mana is a big deal there. But yeah, Pyroblast and Red Elemental Blast, of course, are cards that are great hate. Once again, if you are in a red deck, you're going to want those cards, and those are cards that potentially could go as early as the pick 1 through 10. So they're worth listing in here as well. Is Pyroblast and Reb. But once again, we're seeing not a ton of things up here. Like if you're looking at stretch goals of picks 1 through 10, we don't have a lot of things here. So fetch lands you can start the run early. In our previous VRDs, they actually went very early by comparison. So fetch lands here, it looks like somebody took a 4th pick Underground Sea, and that's just an unreasonably early pick. But let's see when Polluted Delta went. This is about right. It went about 10th to 11th pick. You can see the big run started. Who kicked this one off? It looks like Dan took Trop, and then Eric, and then it kind of ran all the way down here that everyone takes fetch lands for a while. Fetches and duels, which is obviously very good. But that's kind of, you can push this up from 10th pick if you're in burn, all the way up to like 4th or 5th. But yeah, you kind of have a lot of play to this strategy. Because you don't have a lot of cards that you need to take, you have the great opportunity to start this fetch land train whenever you want. You can just pick up, if you're in the 2 seed, having Ancestral Recall and being more of a counter burn deck can be very powerful. But you can also just make sure that you have your lands on set, right? Having Clifftop Retreat, having all of these dual lands, so you can basically be, in this case, a red-white deck. You could easily do the same thing with a red-green deck. I believe it was one of the later ones where somebody decided to take 40 of their 45 picks and play those. And I'm trying to remember who that was that did this, but it ended up being a really interesting deck where it was a 3-color Naya deck, and they had every card written out that they wanted. And it ended up not performing as well as I think people wanted it to, but it was a very powerful deck, and it could just end up killing people from nowhere. So that's another option, is if you want to go into the creature-based control list for this, you can fall into that space as well. So the advantages of burn, once again, you get to push the dual lands really early. You get to have a consistent strategy that doesn't impact people with a lot of it doesn't have a lot of overlap with people, so you don't have to fight for things. And you have a relatively clear run where you get to decide around pick 20 to when to start taking the cards. Like, if are people counter drafting against you, right? Are there these warmths and chills getting taken? If so, you need to be able to have ways to answer those. And you get to play a really reactive style of a draft. Whereas in something like a show and tell deck, you're kind of fighting for counter spells, you're fighting for your combo pieces. In Burn, you don't have to worry about that so much, so you actually get to watch the table, see what's going to be great. You get to pull out cards that are going to be insane hosers, right? You get to run Boil against people that you wouldn't necessarily have the luxury of being able to get if you were in a more synergistic style. So I think Burn's a great strategy, definitely worth checking out and giving a shot. I don't know if I'm going to have the wherewithal to give it a shot in this next one, but I think it's a really interesting and cool strategy that is probably overperforming. I think people undervalue how powerful burn truly can be. So it's going to be a cool one to see if somebody does take this and run with it and see if they can make things happen. Um, but yeah, I think that in this format you do have to find the repeatable sources, these creatures. One we didn't mention here is relatively new when it's in standard right now, and I should definitely be aware of this. Once again, we'll jump back to this MTG top 8 and find the standard list with burn, because although it's not quite the same, I guess they call it mono red in standard. Red deck wins. I'm sorry, totally wrong. Um, in these decks, they have a lot more creatures, right? You're not going to be running Fanatical Firebrand in this format. It's just not nearly good enough. Um, but cards like Gitu Lava Runner probably isn't good enough. But cards like Runaway Steamkin, this one seems like it pops out to me as a very powerful card that playing a 2 mana 4/4 could definitely make things happen. So I can see a strategy where you're not so worried about burning people out by hitting them in the face, but you're just playing insanely powerful red creatures, and then working your way from there to just killing people with those creatures. So let's see. Shock, Wizard's Lightning. Oh, Wizard's Lightning is actually one that's interesting. If you wanted to go into a Wizard strategy, you could end up in a place where you're playing Wizard's Lightning along with some of the like Viashino Pyromancer and things like that, and you're running a Wizard deck. Um, that's probably if you do end up in the red-blue deck. There's the Flying Wizard and a lot of other ones that do powerful things. You can also push into the Planeswalker cards. So then at that point you get Chandras, right? So you could be playing Planeswalkers, and at this point, you just have like all of the Chandras, and they're all like all the 4-drop Chandras are very good. There's the one with 4 abilities that generate 2 mana, deals damage to your opponent. These can be really good, and at that point, you're also probably going to be on Koth of the Hammer, and potentially even the new Tybalt. Being able to stop their life gain is a big game. Um, and these cards kind of also fill in this draw refill category really nicely. Similarly, Experimental Frenzy would fall into the same category, where you do get the drawback, but you can just rattle off 5 shots in a row and win the game. Um, I just realized I'm not showing the section I'm doing here. So yeah, in the draw refill, Experimental Frenzy could show up down here. All these Planeswalkers are very powerful, so it's definitely worth thinking about whether you want to be going a little bigger. And at that point, you could even go into the older. You could even be playing things like Trinisphere, the Dragon, Rakdos Pit Dragon. You can be playing a lot of the cards that fall more into the Red Prison style of deck that Steven was talking about wanting to draft. It's a different style, so I could definitely see arguing that's not a burn deck, but it's just a really cool spot to be in a world where you get to play all these burn spells and not be fighting pit for picks. Because all of the blue, we saw 7 people, I believe, on blue in the last one, 6 or 7 in the last one, which is just obviously not a place, if you can help it, that you want to be. In the last 2, I believe we had a max of 2 red players, which is unusually low. Usually you expect like 2 to 4, but I mean, only having 1 burn player is very powerful. Only one red player is very powerful if you're on burn, because you just get to avoid all of the issues. It can be a pretty fun spot to be. Um, so yeah, I think that's going to be calling it for this strategy kind of discussion, talking about what burn is. So the last thing to do is kind of announce the date. We're going to have August 25 as the next VRD that's going to be happening. If anyone in chat has questions, feel free to ask, and we can talk through anything that you want to talk about. But otherwise, I think that we have a good layout, a good discussion of what burn looks like in this format and when you want to fall into it, and what advantages you get from it. But August 25, we're going to be starting at 10 a.m. just like the last time. So yeah, feel free. Post that around. I'll be posting on Twitter here in a minute, and I'm really excited. We're going to start announcing players little by little. We'll probably only have 1 or 2 more of these discussions before we get to that, because then I'll be going full steam, getting everything ready for that one. There's some pretty exciting stuff coming down the pipeline, and it's going to be a good time. So yeah, mark your calendars, August 25. Hope you tune in, tell people about it. Thanks for hanging out, and thanks for tuning in. See ya.